Zuschauer, Migration ist ein Dauerthema in Europa. Es nimmt zunehmend bedrohliche Ausmaße an. Lampedusa zeigt aktuell deutlich die Bedrohungslage, der wir in Europa ausgesetzt sind. Von der aktuellen Fokussierung wegzukommen, den Blick zu weiten, habe ich einen bekannten, zwischenzeitlich pensionierten schwedischen Akademiker eingeladen, Prof. Karl-Olov Arnstberg. Sein Spezialgebiet ist die Ethnologie, die Erforschung der Merkmale verschiedener Völker sowie die Unterschiede und Beziehungen zwischen ihnen. Seine Karriere begann in den 60er Jahren und gegen Ende seiner beruflichen Laufbahn war er zwischen 1995 und 2008 Professor an der Universität Stockholm. Professor Arnstberg war und ist ein produktiver Schriftsteller. Unermüdlich klärt er die Schweden über die aktuelle und zukünftige Auswirkungen der unkontrollierten Massenmigration auf. Begrüßen wir Professor Arnstberg und werfen einen Blick auf die Situation in Schweden. Schweden, ein Beispiel, das Nachahmer wie Deutschland abschrecken sollte. Bitte, Herr Professor, das Wort gehört Ihnen. Ich bin sehr gespannt, was Sie uns zu berichten haben.
Thank you for having me and for this most flattering introduction also about me. Sorry, I will tell you about Sweden, and it is not a good example to follow for Germany. It is a kind of warning. With regard to mass immigration, Sweden and Germany have a common starting point in the Second World War. For Germany, it has been central to show that Nazism is something evil of the past, that Germans are now among the good guys. For Swedes, who more or less dodged the Second World War, it has been important to compensate. Also, we are eager to show that we are of the right, democratic and liberal mind. To this can be added a Swedish hybris. Sweden was the first nation in Europe to embrace the multicultural ideology. It is now 48 years since the Swedish Parliament, with inspiration from Canada, took the then neither particularly important nor controversial decision that Sweden should be a multicultural society. Had the politicians had any idea of the problems that our society would face almost 50 years later, it is hard to believe that they would have boarded that train. It is a journey that is not yet over. As a result, Sweden is now grappling with the consequences in terms of crime, spiraling costs, and ethnic segregation. I will give you some examples of the thorny issues that media prefer to avoid. One of the major problems is the Muslims, as impossible to integrate in Sweden as in other countries. In the 1970s, we had a few thousand Muslims in Sweden. At the turn of the millennium, they were around 1% of the population. By 2016, the proportion had accelerated to 8.1%. This is a record-breaking increase in the Western world. The consequence for Sweden should be a matter of the highest priority in both politics and research. However, it is not. The risk of dealing with such issues is too great. Who wants to ruin a professional career by having the term Islamophobe added to his or her CV? Why is it taboo to discuss the consequences of the great change from being a people in an ethno-state to becoming a mixed population in a multicultural society? Wouldn't it be better if we instead had an open discussion in our established media, where we could get all around and correct information without moral instructions, instead of the agenda and heavily biased journalism that dominates today? Do we not have a duty to take care of what previous generations have built up? The fateful question is, which Sweden do we want to forward to the next generation? Ever since the Social Democrats came to power in 1932, Sweden has been politically unique in the sense that the people and the political leaders have been both harmonious and united. This is no longer the case. Today, Sweden has a power elite that is not on speaking terms with the people, neither interested in responding to their interests. To take just one example, politicians cheat the voters by claiming that immigration to Sweden is now at the EU's minimum level. This is not true. After the mass immigration that hit Germany and Sweden, in particular in autumn 2015, about 800,000 immigrants have been granted residence permits. Remember that Sweden is a small country with a small population. In 8 years of alleged restrictions imposed by politicians, the population has increased by about 8%, with an absolute majority of young male Muslims from the Middle East and African countries, such as Somalia and Eritrea. In the first 6 months of 2023, this year, more than 64,000 new residence permits have been granted. Sweden is a country in Europe that has proportionally grown the most since the millennium shift, from 8.8 million to 10.6 million today. In April 2021, only 66% of the Swedish population had parents born in Sweden. This is not something that media considers worth reporting or discussing. The big and growing question is whether the end point will be a societal collapse. Nobody really knows how many billion euros these immigrants have cost and continue to cost. What our politicians, however, do know is that there is no money to deal with the recession that has hit Europe since the outbreak of war in Ukraine. Sweden has a severe housing shortage, a shortage of police officers, not enough of kindergartens, and hospital emergency rooms are full to bursting, as they were even before the coronavirus pandemic. So are also the prisons. School results are falling, and pouring in more money doesn't seem to help. The countryside is decaying, and we are starting to see that some municipalities are financially unable to cope with the social commitment of the welfare-dependent non-European immigrants. Sweden's economy is said to be strong, despite having the worst GDP performance in the whole EU. If we have a situation where over 1 million people from the third world no longer have their livelihood through benefits, Sweden will become a dangerous country to live in. This can happen surprisingly quickly, and of course neither politicians nor opinion formers will understand what happened. In the first half of this year, 91 bombings were carried out in Sweden. This is more than in the whole of last year. The main targets are private homes of criminals and their relatives. Many neighbors are also affected. A few weeks ago, a 60-year-old woman, mother to a gang leader who has fled to Turkey, was executed in the Swedish province city Uppsala. The perpetrators appear to be two second-generation immigrants in their early teens. Deadly violence is now increasingly common in public places, and innocent people are being targeted. Well, what can politicians do to reverse the trend? Number one, the political parties have to agree on a common description of the state of affairs in the country. As long as they devote their energy to fighting for power, they will not be able to turn the tide. A common problem formulation is therefore needed, followed by a common program. Number two, revocation of citizenship and deportation for criminals to a completely different extent than today is necessary. Number three, a sufficiently strong police force to be able to maintain the monopoly of violence. They do not have it in many Swedish suburbs today. Number four, total stop for all so-called refugee immigration. Number five, re-immigration programs. With that, I shall conclude my brief survey of the situation in Sweden, and I do hope Germany shall not continue down the same path as that of Sweden. Thank you.
Herr Professor, es wurde für mich deutlich einige Parallelen zu meinem Land sichtbar. Besonders das Desinteresse, das Gutmenschengehabe, die Ablehnung der eigenen Identität scheint mir die Wurzel allen Übels zu sein. Nur noch wenige Menschen sind bereit, sich für die eigene Nation einzusetzen. Weniger als ein Fünftel würden Deutschland verteidigen. Jeder Zehnte im Konfliktfall sogar das Land verlassen. Kann man diese Entwicklung denn noch aufhalten?
Well, the tide of time changed all. So this will be history one day, of course. The question is, what's coming next? And I think we have to have a new kind of democracy. We have to maybe have a kind of driver's license for the voters, and we have to have education of politicians, because nowadays we have passive voters and we have politicians that are only interested to fight over the power. They are not really interested in the severe problems in society. They come second. And well, I think a kind of education and minimal requirements for both voting and for being a politician is necessary. Otherwise, the democracy will not survive.
Eine andere Frage. Der Zustrom nach Deutschland steigt stark an. Viele Vergünstigungen und ein schönes Leben locken. Das wird aber der Punkt kommen, wo wir diese Versprechungen nicht mehr erfüllen werden können. Alleine die Unterbringung der Migranten ist schon nicht mehr möglich. Die Kommunen sind am Ende. Die geplanten 400.000 Neubauten per anno sind auf 200.000 geschrumpft. Ich sehe schon Eignungen und zwangsweiche Räumungen von Wohnungen am Horizont. Sehen Sie angesichts der im Vergleich zu den Europäern relativ gewaltaffiner Migranten ein echtes Bedrohungspotenzial für unsere Länder auf uns zukommen, falls deren Ansprüche nicht erfüllt werden können?
That's the main problem, because both Sweden and Germany has a burden. In Sweden we have around 10% of the population that are dependent on the state to survive, and they are not capable to get jobs. They do not have what the industry requires from people. So, and they, of course, they do not want to go back to their former countries, and it's a second and third generation growing up, and they are not actually integrated. A few are, of course, or more than a few, but there is a growing, more desperate population, and frankly, I don't know how this problem should be solved. The democracy is too soft, and of course, we put democracy in the first, is the most important, but the democracy has accomplished this situation. And the way politics is done today is far too weak to solve these problems.
Okay. Ja, in diesen Ausführungen wurden auch einige Punkte genannt, die den Begriff der Intelligenz betroffen haben. Das ist ein sehr schwieriger und Pfad, den wir jetzt hier gehen. Ich weiß, dass wir sehr empfindliche Seelen möglicherweise auch verletzen können damit, aber wir müssen auch diesen Punkt betrachten. Wir müssen ganz unvoreingenommen auch hier drauf schauen, auf diese Möglichkeit. Wir haben in jeder Gesellschaft, in jeder Kultur haben wir verschiedene Intelligenzquotienten, haben wir einen Median, der schwankt rund um die Welt. Die Frage ist jetzt für mich an den Herrn Professor, was passiert, wenn eine weniger intelligente Gesellschaft, um es mal vereinfacht auszudrücken, auf eine intelligentere trifft, eine Gastgesellschaft, die ganz anderes Niveau hat. Wird das auf Dauer sich nivellieren oder werden wir hier in ein ernsthaftes Problem geraten, wo die ganze Gesellschaft absackt?
Well, intelligence was growing, with about 3 points every 10th year during the 20th century. But today, the psychologists agree on that IQ is going down. And this is not only because of immigration, but it's also because there is today poor people have many children, if there are many children at all. And I think I saw a number in Germany that among university-educated women, if it was 30 or 40% do not have children.
Yep.
And that is frightening because intelligence goes on the female side most. And this means that the gen pool, also in Sweden, is drained because the highest IQ women do not have children or have very few children. And this, of course, affects the gem pool, and it will result in a lowering of the IQ. It doesn't go fast, but this is very controversial. At the same time as psychologists say that IQ measures are very valid. They have done those for more than 100 years. And this is not soft science. They are very reliable. And they say, which is also controversial, that the average IQ is 100. It's just a number. But if you go below 90, it isn't possible to uphold the democracy. And we see that, which is also actually a fact, that we don't like it, but it is a fact that south of Sahara, there are many countries with a low IQ, and they are not able to uphold real democracy. So this is a major problem that we have to address. But I doubt any politicians today dare to do that.
Dankeschön, Herr Professor. Ich glaube, Sie haben hier in der Tat ein sehr düsteres Bild von Schweden, den Aussichten gezeichnet und das, was auf Deutschland zukommt. Aber ich glaube, wo viel dunkel ist, wird irgendwann auch mal wieder Licht kommen. Wir werden am Ende des Tages sicher die Situation verbessern, wenn wir unsere Politiker zu Beginn dazu bringen, dass sie alle diese Probleme auf den Tisch legen und unvoreingenommen einfach beurteilen und rational handeln.
Ja.
Und ich glaube, die Bevölkerung wird das auch verstehen und unsere Gesellschaft wird es aushalten und unsere Demokratie wird in der Form überlegen.
Ja. Gut.
Ich danke Ihnen ebenfalls für Ihre offenen Worte und ich hoffe, dass ich Sie hier in diesen Räumlichkeiten wiedersehen kann und dass wir vielleicht mit ein bisschen Hoffnung unser Gespräch beenden können.
Ja.
Dankeschön fürs Kommen.
Vielen Dank.